The news last week that New York Attorney General Letitia James was dropping out of the governor's race to run for re-election had some of us wondering why. Did the AG want to finish her case into the twice impeached, disgraced ex-president in a case where there have been very few updates, very few public-facing developments? Last night provided us with what is potentially a big one. The fraud inquiry into Donald Trump, being led by Manhattan AG Cy Vance and assisted by James's office, is now honing in again on his assets, especially his financial statements. The financial statements that the Trump organization used when they went out to woo lenders, with one of his longtime accountants who used to prepare these documents, testifying in recent weeks before a grand jury. Prosecutors have also interviewed a former managing director at Deutsche Bank who arranged hundreds of millions of dollars in loans to Donald Trump, according to sources, giving us a second line of inquiry and new questions into Trump's potential wrongdoing. As investigators zero in on these documents, the main question emerging is whether the former president inflated the value of his assets to defraud the people lending him money. Let's bring into our conversation Chuck Rosenberg. He's a former U.S. attorney, former senior FBI official, and a current MSNBC legal analyst. So, Chuck, I read all this, and you and I traded messages as I tried to understand this. I thought we already knew this. I thought Michael Cohen, under threat of penalty for being charged with lying to Congress, already answered these questions in a line of questioning very specific on this from Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. He made abundantly clear that, yes, Donald Trump inflated his assets to get loans. What is happening in this case to corroborate that or prove it again?
Yeah, we did know that, Nicole. You're exactly right. We heard it from Michael Cohen. But if you're a prosecutor, you got to prove it. And you wouldn't base your entire case just on Michael Cohen's testimony. He's a convicted felon, and he's changed his story a bunch of times. So you need to corroborate it. You need to talk to other people. So who best to talk to than the accountants and the bankers who dealt with Mr. Trump and with his finances? Those are exactly the people you would expect to see in the grand jury. And I imagine they're being asked precisely, what did Mr. Trump say to you? What did he indicate to you? Who is responsible for the numbers that are on these financial statements or these tax documents? Because it's not enough, Nicole, as you and I have discussed, simply to show that a document that Trump submitted is false. You also have to show that it's intentionally false. And if you want to prosecute Trump for it, you have to show it's intentionally false because of Trump. And so the people who received that stuff, who handled that stuff, the intermediaries are absolutely critical in a case like this.
I want to ask you about immunity and why that would be part of this conversation if they weren't doing what you just articulated, telling the truth about Trump's role. This is from the Washington Post. The appearances by Mazars accountant Donald Bender and Deutsche Bank's Rosemary Vralbeck suggest prosecutors are seeking information about Trump's finances from a small circle of outside partners who handled details of Trump's taxes and real estate deals. Both were never Trump's employees, but they knew more about his company's inner workings than many employees did. When Vralbeck met with Vance's staff, one of the people said prosecutors asked her about Trump's personal role in dealing with the bank. For Bender, that's the accountant, Trump's longtime accountant, even his brief appearance before the grand jury had legal significance. Under New York law, witnesses before a grand jury are automatically granted immunity from prosecution, meaning that Bender could not be charged for his work for Trump. Why is that important?
Yeah, well, it's a quirk of New York state law that if you're called before a grand jury, and I have to add this because it's important, Nicole, and you testify truthfully, then you're immune from prosecution. So prosecutors must have made a decision that folks like the accountant or the banker either don't have any criminal liability, they didn't break the law, or if they had some, it's much more important to trade with them information for immunity. And so this is not that unusual in federal prosecutions. You don't automatically get immunity for testifying in the grand jury, but often we will immunize a witness to obtain her evidence, to obtain her testimony. What they're doing here, and we don't have many peeks into this investigation, as you said at the outset, Nicole, is we're seeing how prosecutors are thinking about the case. Who do they need to bridge that gap between the document, which is purportedly false, and Trump, who benefited from the falsity. Think of it this way. If I file a false tax return and I only use one person to help me prepare the return, that's pretty easy, right? You go talk to that accountant, you put her in the grand jury. She says, I got all that information from Chuck. If the numbers are false, it's because of him, not me. Relatively simple case. Here you have a whole bunch of people, dozens perhaps, between the false document and Mr. Trump. And so you need to talk to them. You need to know what they know.